You think you knew what was going to happen this Sunday. You were going to have a guest speaker, Peter somebody, I can't pronounce his surname. Didn't help me. So we can't even predict who's going to be on the platform each Sunday morning. On the order of service, it says that he's here. And I'm not. Well, we can't help that, can we? Let me see if I can get my machine out because I'm unprepared. So we're in a time of crisis. I've been telling you about that. A time of unpredictable change. A time when we can't know what's going to happen next. The world seems to have turned against us. Christendom is over and we don't know what to do. Genuinely, that's a problem for us. We don't know what to do. How do we go forward? How do we even get ready to go forward? And to some degree, that's what I'm trying to talk about, how maybe we can start getting ready to go forward. But even if we get ready, I'm not sure, and I don't think anybody is sure, how this change that's occurring in the world is going to work out and where we're going to fit within it. So how do we cope? I think we've got two alternatives. One, we can be defensive. Oh, that should have come up. Defensive. And being defensive, we're more likely to resist change. We're likely to hold to the tradition that we've always had. What people do in crisis is they tend to head for what they know. We go back to what we know. And so we say, it was good in the past. It was good back then when I was a teenager, because that's often the time we go back to. When I was a teenager, it was fantastic. So why can't we go back there? Because we can't. Time moves on. Change occurs. The situation's different now. And as much as we might lament the past, it's not coming back. Might be a bit of a shock for some of you. It's not coming back. So we tend to attack one another. You remember when a crisis occurred in the past, the church was established. And somewhere in amidst the 15th century or something like that, a lot of this had happened before, but you get a Martin Luther comes along and says, we're not doing things right. And he begins to try and reform the church.
Hallelujah.
Yes, hallelujah. What did they do? They threatened his life. And every time a change occurs like that and people grasp for their tradition, hold on to the tradition, we turn against each other. So we get denomination building upon denomination, building upon denomination, because we criticise one another. Our own movement is a movement seeking to reform or restore the church to its basic values. A good idea, but it spawned 3 different churches in the process of trying to unite the church as a whole. Because one group criticised the other group, criticised the other group, and we criticise to the point that we can't live with one another anymore. Because competition seems to be the rule of the day. So the crisis goes on. This is what the nature of Christendom did over all those years. It began in conflict, it developed in conflict, and we began to kill people at the stake because they were different from our point of view, from our authority and the orthodox way of thinking in the time. We maintained it with power and with violence. And it's that power and violence that the world has turned against now. because it was abusive. It's not just the children that people are upset about. It's the way in which the church has tended to tell people this is the way it must be. And eventually the world said, it doesn't have to be that way, you know. We don't like it that way. And some of the things we try to tell them that they had to do weren't even relevant to our message. They were part of our traditional way of thinking. A second way, maybe, of handling the crisis is to think creatively about what to do next. And that's going to mean that we need to embrace change and we need to experiment, adapt, reshape what it means to be. Yes, go back to those basic restoration values that we had in the beginning of our movement because they were valuable. But to discover new ways of expressing those values in the world. Because much of what we did was repeat the traditional activity and forms of a church that we sought to restore. Maybe we need to do it completely differently now. Maybe the structure needs to change entirely. Maybe we need to experiment with ways of doing church that are not the same as before. I know that, for instance, in Victoria and some other parts of the world, the mini church or the micro church or the house church movement is beginning to blossom. Tiny little churches growing in houses again, going back to the beginnings. They're experimenting. To some degree, my whole theme of Readiness for Mission is a kind of experiment for me, in the sense that the experiment is, can we stimulate some new way of thinking in the church and maybe come up with some other answers based on our Christian values. This is just me playing around really, this little bit. If you look at the line I put underneath, I realised I'd created a little matrix. And you can actually put those words together into creatively embrace change or experiment based on values. But if you do it the other way, that way, we creatively experiment and we embrace change based on values. I just thought that was clever. I'm not sure it's any great point there except the points that it sort of makes itself, but I just thought that was clever, so I thought I'd do it out there.
It looks good.
Thank you. And I've clicked the last one, which is the basic value of Christianity. The basic value on which we work is the value of loving one another. This seems to, or even other Christians. I grew up in a time, or my mother grew up in a time, when it was not only acceptable, but appropriate to hate Catholics. And my mother hated Catholics. And I wondered what they did in that strange school. Where were we last weekend? We were in Melbourne, attending our third grandchild in that little group, Thomas's first Holy Communion in the local Catholic church, because that's where they're associated. And it was a joy to be there. I don't hate Catholics. I don't hate Anglicans either. Or Baptists. We used to hate Baptists. That was the thing to do, really. They were too much like us, and we thought, well, the competition meant we kind of had to hate them. No. It's all about loving one another. That's the key value. It's not about competition or criticising somebody else because they don't agree with us exactly the same as before, because Jesus gave us just one commandment. One commandment. He didn't give us multiple commandments. He gave us one commandment and one commission. The commandment was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbour as you love yourself. That's it. That's Jesus' commandment. All the other rubbish that we get on with can go away. Because primarily, that's what we're here for. And whenever we are not doing that, we ought to get down on our knees and say sorry. Because that's our primary sin. Christianity's had this debate all the way through its history. Are we here to love people, or are we here to frighten people? Or are we here to do both? The Catholic Church built a system where they promoted fear in those early years. Fear of death and hell, and they created a system of purgatory to try and help people understand and fear a little more, I think. And they worked up a system where you could pay your way out or earn your way out of this, and and then we came along and replaced that fear of death with another fear of death. The evangelist would stand on the platform and say, "What if you were to die tonight? Where would you go?" And we finished up promoting the fear of hell. Not the love of God. It was our mistake, because we worked out that people would respond to fear quicker than they respond to love. Wrong. Well, it might have been right. That might have been right, actually. But it was the wrong message. Jesus didn't come promoting fear. There are only a couple of times he actually talked about hell at all, and most of the fear stuff that he talked about was directed towards the leaders of the people who were sending people astray. I don't remember any passage where Jesus actually threatened somebody with rejection. He was a bit hard on the Pharisees and Sadducees and all that lot. But for ordinary folk, he was enormously gracious. Enormously gracious. Illustrated by his death on the cross, which is all about love and forgiveness, not about condemnation or fear-mongering, guilt-producing, shame-producing. And we've done a lot of that. So we have to do a little repentance in this new era, because people are sick of that one. We've got to go somewhere else. You've seen this before. You'll see it again. To love means to value, to esteem, to build up the value of a person, to feel and manifest generous concern for, to be faithful towards, to delight in, to set store upon. It's a valuing love that sees people around you as children of God, not as dirty, rotten sinners. That encourage you to see people as precious and encourage them to discover their preciousness, even though they feel guilty and shameful, even though they feel rejected and outcast, even though they feel down. Jesus comes and says, "I love you." You are valuable to me. You're God's child, for goodness sake. Don't see yourself in those ways. See yourself as precious. It's the love of the will, of deep felt commitment. It's a choice love. It's a choice love, and I'll get to that in a moment, because now I've got to my theme for the day. All you need is love, and I want to sing too. All you need is love. Na 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 na. All you need is love. Na 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 na. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. Oh, that'll do. I had to do that. I thought about doing that at the beginning, but I thought, well, they might not like it. This love is not about instinct. Some people are just really good, loving people. It's part of the nature of their upbringing, and this is not the love of instinct or upbringing. It's not the love of feeling, though it is passionate towards the one loved. It's not emotional in the huggy and warm and lovely sense. That's another form of love. This love is about the power of choice. You choose to love. Like I said in a previous sermon many weeks ago, in between all those gaps when I wasn't here. Like in the wedding service, it's a choice. Will you love this person in good times and in bad, in the ups and the downs of life? Will you? And the person says, I will. It's a choice. Foundation of all love is a choice. I choose. It's not about feeling that I can't, it's choosing that I will. Though the word power I always worry about, because power also, when I start saying it's about power of, I'm concerned that that's what we succumbed to in a past time. The fact that we had so many people on our side, we thought it was in our power to control. This is not about control. It was in our power to manipulate. This is not manipulation. It was in our power to have authority over. This is not about that kind of authority. This is the power of choice to value someone, to see somebody as precious. It's about living out of our beliefs. And what's our primary belief? God is love. God calls us to love one another. So we form personal policies, and you'll get that to be a repeating term or a repeating theme of mine, because I think we do need to choose beforehand. I will love this one. Remember my question? How am I going to love this one? Well, this is the choice. The choice is I will love this one. Even when this one seems so unlovable. Because love is a choice, I can choose. That's, I think, a reasonable definition of spirituality. A person who lives out of their beliefs, who lives out of their values, who lives out of their God consciousness. I think that's what it means to be a spiritual person. Not one who just goes with the flow of feelings or simply follows the intellect. Not one who lives within the tradition that they've grown up with or lives within the culture that they're part of and really becomes apathetic. A spiritual person is one who says, this is what I believe. And because this is what I believe, this is the way I behave. I choose it. It's not because of any other reason. I choose it. I love because I choose to love. Because God has loved me first and called me to love. And this is another little clever thing. Jesus put love at the centre of his message. I say that. Paul put love at the centre of his message. This is the end of chapter 12 and the beginning of chapter 14. Now, it's a bit hard to read there. I must have turned around myself. Are all apostles, are all prophets, are all teachers, do all work miracles, do all possess gifts of healing, do all speak with tongues, do all interpret, but earnestly desire the higher gifts, and I will show you still a better and more excellent way. You need the glasses on as well. Now, I noticed a phrase. You see, I noticed the word excellent, earnestly desire. But then I noticed at the beginning of chapter 14, earnestly desire appears again. It actually appears in a phrase which looks almost the same. Earnestly desire the higher gifts. And below it says, earnestly desire the spiritual gifts. And I began to wonder whether or not those two are linked. And so if you cross out those words, you can read, do all them, but earnestly desire the spiritual gifts, especially that you may prophesy. For the one who speaks in tongues is not to men. We can put it all together. So you finish up thinking, I begin to think, Paul has written verse 12, chapter 12. There's no chapters in his writing anyway. He just wrote this bit. He wrote that bit, and I think he wrote it like that. It ran straight into chapter 14. There's no 13. But when he looked at that later on, this is my theory, this is my imagination, don't take it too seriously. He looks at that and he says there's something left out of that. The basis of it all is left out of that. And either he wrote or he found this beautiful chapter which we call chapter 13. And he stuck it in. Said a few things the same at one end and the other and just put chapter 13 in there, that little poem, that little beautiful statement about the nature of love. I have to look at my order of service because I've got no memory at all. I thought I was right. Kathy's going to come and read that to us.
If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith and can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonour others, it does not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part that we prophesy in part. And when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.
Paul excludes certain things. I may be able to speak the languages of men, of angels, but have no love. I'm nothing. And then he goes into a little later into a list of what love is like, which in a sense becomes what I call a reasonable place for these policies I talk about. Love is patient. What's my policy? I want to be patient. I want to be kind. I don't want to be jealous, and I don't want to be proud or conceited. I want to replace the word proud with conceited because I've got an argument in my head about that. I don't want to be selfish or irritable. I want to be a person who loves. So these become like the fruit of the Spirit. They become personal policies of behaviour. This is the way I want to be. I think it in advance. This is the way I want to be. And if I'm not that way, I need to confess that I'm not that way to God and to whoever I mistreated in the journey. As a discipline for me, to keep me on track. The normal thing would be to say, oh, I made a mistake there, but if I keep quiet, nobody might notice. But my own discipline is, if I make a mistake that I think is a mistake according to me, I mean, I probably make lots of mistakes that I didn't even notice. But if I make one of those mistakes, I want to confess it. I want to make it right. So I have a policy about that, a personal policy about the way to live. So what's this got to do with readiness for mission? Which is my theme after all. All you need is love. So the question is, how does love come into the consciousness of mission? Mission is about intentionally and deliberately putting Jesus' creative, loving values at the centre of our church's life. Not just at the centre of your own life, though I think that's important, but at the centre of our church's life. So everyone feels welcome. Extravagantly welcome. Everyone feels cared for. Extravagantly cared for. Everyone experiences levels of kindness. Everyone is treated patiently, kindly, generously. We don't show a great deal of irritability, although we need to be honest about who we are. It's not a show. I'm talking about human change and the deliberate policies of the church to put these sorts of values into effect. Because, as you know, in a world where we're seen as abusers because of our past behaviour, I mean, generically, the church's behaviour overall, the same is what Jesus said at the beginning is still true. They'll know we are Christians by our love. So what in the end do we have to offer? We have the good news that Jesus gave us about the kingdom of God, about a world that loves. The lion lays down with the lamb. We have a message about harmony and peace and people getting on well together. And the promise that someday in the future, someday that we don't know about, that God will make that a reality for the world. Remember the centre of Jesus' prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth. It's not just about heaven when we die. It's about living the life that Jesus called us to in this life, which is about those loving values that we've been talking about. Because all we need really is love. I think the second thing we have to offer is a loving Christian community. When people are lost, when they don't know where to turn, and they don't know who to approach, when they find a loving community, all of those things are there. When they find a truly loving community, that's where they want to belong. Some of you have experienced that. Why are you here? Because you found that sometime in the past. And I believe that's the germ of the future. That people will come and hear a message which is accepting and loving and truthful and real. And they'll find a community that backs that up with love and care and faithfulness and hope. It's all good news. It's all good news.